Hi, and welcome back. My name is Sarah from Real Fitness Coaching, and I'm continuing this habit series of videos for you. This is something I work with in my own life. This is something I work with my clients on a regular basis. And as I mentioned in the introduction video, I am reading the book Tiny Habits. Disclaimer, I have not finished the book. Uh-oh, I lost my place. But I think I'm on about a page 127. Yeah, that sounds about right. Out of like 306. So I'm making my progress. I do want to mention, if I haven't mentioned it already, maybe I did in last video, I am reading this 5 minutes every workday. That's it. Tiny habits in action. And I have to say, most days I'm resistant to doing it. I don't feel like doing it. So I share that because I think a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about here with you, you might be feeling like you're alone, or like, why can't you just get up enough motivation and willpower to get things done? And that's just not true. And so I think it's important to normalize that these things are challenging for all of us, including myself. And yeah, that's important. That's important that we kind of normalize that. So today, I want to start bringing up the topic of motivation. This comes up early in the book, but there's also a full chapter about it. And one of the things that BJ calls motivation, he talks about it as a motivation monkey. And, I just kind of visualize that as just kind of flitting about, like if you can imagine a monkey in a forest, moving from limb to limb, jumping around, chitter chattering, what have you. I think you probably get my drift, but I want you to really imagine that, visualize that, because that is what our motivation can truly be like. Some days it's here, some days it's there, like it's up, it's down, it's all over the place. And I'm not saying that monkeys are unreliable because I have no direct experience, but I will say that, particularly from reading what BJ has to say and also from my own life experience and all my work with clients, is that motivation is unreliable, it is inconsistent, and it is not something to be counted on. There is a pretty interesting formula that he talks about, which we'll go into deeper in the future, but I want to just broach it now because it's important. And that is that the more motivation you have, so the higher your motivation is, the harder of a task you can complete. So we've heard of enormous, massive feats of strength when someone's child is in danger or under a car and they've lifted a car, right? High motivation, so enormous. They can accomplish a very difficult task, right? I say that because let's also think about the opposite. When you have no motivation to do something, right? It is nearly insurmountable to accomplish a difficult task. So that's where the tiny habits come in. And I like to just start talking about this and fleshing this out, because if we have a sense that we don't have a lot of motivation to do something, and specifically here, we're talking about exercise, healthy habits, nutrition, those aren't often things that we have a lot of motivation about consistently. You might have it intermittently, and we'll talk about that. However, if we're noticing that our motivation is quite low, one of the suggestions, and really the main tenet of tiny habits, is keep the difficulty also low, right? Keep it super easy, small, simple, tiny. So let's just have it be said that there is a relationship between our level of motivation and the difficulty of a task or a habit, or however you want to call it, to complete. Okay, it's in like a sliding scale. BJ has a great chart, and I don't feel like I'm really great at teaching the chart yet, so I'm going to practice that a little more. But if you do have the book, there are charts in there where he talks about the behavior and the motivation, ability, and a prompt, and sort of where that all occurs. So if you really like charts, you definitely might want to get the book or look it up online and start familiarizing yourself with that. Again, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to teach that quite yet. But let's get back to the basics about motivation. I want you to start to think about yourself. I'll share some examples, and let's see just kind of like what that stimulates, like what kind of comes to mind for you. So I'm going to use some non-exercise and non-food examples just to get you easily understanding and feeling this relationship. So let's talk about if you celebrate Christmas, December 25th, or Hanukkah, or whatever holiday that you celebrate that might include lots of food. This might be a birthday, could be Thanksgiving, right? So let's just imagine you are, you've woken up the day of Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holiday, birthday it is you're celebrating. I want you to think about, I said it wasn't going to be about nutrition and exercise. I started going down the road of a different example. Okay, so let's just keep going with this one. You've woken up on this day. Let's just check in and realistically assess how much motivation do you have on this special day to diet and watch your caloric intake and how well you're doing with getting nutritious foods, right? Like, most people are not on the high scale of motivation on Christmas, Thanksgiving to watch their diet. Okay, your motivation is quite low on that day, right? But let's talk about January 1st, which in this country is a very common day that people are goal setting, starting big diets and exercise plans, right? So typically on that day, we see a very high level of motivation, right? So it's the same, we're talking about like motivation around diet and nutrition, exercise, and how you can see how on 2 different days of the year, we have varying levels of motivation. I think that's important because we need to understand that motivation is constantly changing. I think BJ calls it maybe a shapeshifter. I think if you don't like monkey, maybe shapeshifter is something that lands well for you. So I'll just put that out there. And so let's talk about the first example I was going to give, which had to do with buying gifts. So like, let's just talk about like Hanukkah and Christmas gifts, whatever holiday you might celebrate around that time of year in December. So imagine it's July 10th, let's just say. How motivated are you to go shopping for all those gifts for all the people in your life? If you're really a good planner, maybe you are. But most people would say, no, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not motivated to do that. That's not even on right top of mind. But let's fast forward to like, I don't know, December 1st or 10th or 15th, right? If we're talking about Christmas, now you have a higher level of motivation, right? The pressure is on. That pressure is motivating you, okay? So I share those couple of examples, and now I want you to think a little bit, like, what are things in your life that you can sense that you've had varying or different levels of motivation? Let's talk a little bit about how examples I'll share from some clients and also from my own life about how I've noticed different varying levels of motivation for people, so that if you're having trouble thinking about like how this works for you, this might help just by some stories. The first story I have to share is about me recertifying for my professional work. So as a personal trainer, I stay current with a certification, and I decided I wanted to switch certifying bodies this past year. So I bought the study materials and got all that together and had a date of when I wanted to take the exam and the test. And I knew when my other certification was going to expire. So I was trying to line that up pretty closely. And when I received the certification materials, there was a time limit on when I could take the exam. And I think it was 6 months, I'm guessing. So there was a container there, right? I paid for the exam in advance. If I didn't take the exam within those 6 months, I'd have to pay again. But the other thing that was a stronger motivating factor for me was my own, um, I guess I would say, values, or what's important to me as a professional. I knew that my certification was going to expire. It was very important to me to have this new certification in place around that time. So I knew that date was approaching. And so there was also that similar time pressure. And so for studying over this period of, I think I went from, yeah, maybe August to January. So in that time period of studying, I started out with saying to myself, okay, I'm going to study for 15 minutes every day. And I had various other techniques. I'm not going to go into those now. But why I'm sharing this is that I had strong motivation to do this task of studying and taking an exam for my work. I had the motivation because of the 6 month expiration of the exam coupon. And then I also had the motivation for my own personal desire to be certified when my other certification was going to lapse. So there was some pressure there. And so what I would share is that 15 minutes a day was hard. And I did it on non-work days as well. I got through an 800-page textbook and prepared for the exam in that time. And to be honest, some days I did more than 15 minutes because I had the desire and the energy. But I knew in my mind, okay, I can at least commit to 15 minutes a day. Now, let's just talk about how I had two different ways, two different things motivating me, and that was pretty high for me. So I was able to accomplish what I thought was a pretty moderately challenging goal of 15 minutes a day to study for an exam, weekends, holidays, work days, no matter what. I share that because if there was no motivation in terms of time of when I could take the exam, or, recertifying by a certain time, oh my gosh, that would have been really hard for me to do. Like, really hard. So let's talk about some other examples from clients where you have motivation to do something, right? So you've signed up for like a 5K or a 10K or a bike race or something like that. There's a date, right? And so the date is set. Maybe you're doing it with a friend. So now you have kind of two factors there, right? Like peer pressure and like you've signed up for something. And so that is a motivation to get out and train. Do the walking, the running, the biking, whatever it is that you're preparing for, and do it. So that's where you can overcome some challenges and do something maybe a little bit more difficult with having that motivation in place, right? So you've got a little more motivation, you can do something a little harder of a task. Whereas most people wouldn't be as motivated to get out there and train consistently if they didn't have something like that in the future. I encourage you to think about ways in your life that habits or actions happen based on your level of motivation and what that looks like. And also, kind of get curious about the times when you're not motivated, right, to do something, and kind of look at that like, oh, I have to do that thing. I'm not motivated. I don't want to do it, right? Like, start to get curious about when motivation is present, when it's not, sometimes even on the same topic, right? Like I talked about the dieting and kind of eating healthy on like Thanksgiving versus January 1st, right? Same topic, but different days, different levels of motivation, right? So just kind of, yeah, if you're into it, get curious about how things happen for you or don't happen for you. And also understand that if you're not particularly motivated around something, this is not a failure or a fault or something's wrong with you and you just need more willpower. Like, that is just not true. And so if you've been being hard on yourself for that, let's just like put that in the past and start to understand a little bit more about how for something hard to happen, there needs to be a really pretty high amount of motivation to do that. And if you don't have that motivation, then make that thing less hard, right? That's this idea of the book Tiny Habits, is making things easier, smaller, so that we can overcome the lack of motivation that we don't have, right? Because we now know that motivation is going to come and go. It's going to be kind of like a monkey, a shapeshifter here and there flitting about. You can't count on it consistently. I hope that's helpful. Again, today was an introduction, getting into this idea of motivation and how that plays in with habits. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really glad that you're here. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below or send me an email. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.